Hey, Lark and Rose here. I thought I would do a random rant in response to a discussion that's been going on Facebook having to do with people being mean to statists and judgmental and critical and rude and things like that. And shouldn't we be, you know, nicer and more compassionate and more gentle and stuff and trying to win them over? And I want to zealously argue both sides of the argument, and I'll tell you why. As far as what is more persuasive and what might get people to pay attention, yeah, often being gentler and more sort of compromising, but not really compromising on principles, is more likely to get somebody to have a discussion and get them to listen. However, on the other side, if you're a statist, then by definition you advocate the initiation of violence against innocent people. And you deserve to be condemned. Now, whether it does any good to condemn that person is another question. Whether you're more likely to get through to them, the old you get more flies with honey than with poo, which I'm not actually sure that's true anyway. You can do an experiment on that. But regardless of that, if somebody advocates violence, then they advocate violence. That's not freaking okay. And every minarchist advocates some level of taxation. As somebody who was put in a cage for a year for not paying tribute to the ruling class, kind of pisses me off if you advocate that I be forcibly extorted, and I might be sort of mean to you for advocating that. Verbally mean to you, I mean. And you freaking deserve it. Again, whether that would make for a helpful discussion is another topic. But for comparison's sake, imagine that you know somebody who's like genuinely a Nazi and you're trying to talk them out of it. Now, do you have an obligation to be nice to them if they advocate like all the way totalitarian, authoritarian violence? No, you don't. But if you want to like try to find common ground and try to pull them away from that mindset and that belief system, you can do that too. The thing is, statism is inherently immoral. This is not just about preference. Well, I prefer vanilla and you prefer chocolate. It's about, I prefer to not initiate violence against you and you prefer to initiate violence against me. That's not freaking okay. And I think there are valid and useful reasons for both approaches. One, the trying to be gentle and win them over and try to hear from their point of view and gently try to persuade them to see things differently. And the other, hitting them over the head with a verbal 2x4 to condemn them for advocating evil, because they do. And by the way, so did I when I was a statist. And the thing is, as long as it's comfortable for good people to advocate evil because they're doing it by way of the political system, most people are going to keep doing it. And some people need the discomfort of public condemnation or condemnation from other people saying, you are literally advocating evil, literally condoning violence against innocent people. That's not freaking okay. And the fact that lots of people do that, that doesn't make it okay either. And so I don't find fault. Now, after a certain level, being totally just rude and insulting like isn't going to do any good. But I actually think to some degree it actually does. People should be shamed for advocating evil. And in fact, I sort of wish more people did that to me back when I was a minarchist and I advocated just a little bit of necessary violent extortion and robbery. And I sort of, in retrospect, wish some people bashed me over the head for it. Now, unfortunately, almost everybody I knew was a bigger statist than I was. So almost all of the arguments I had, I was the anti-government person. I just wanted a little tiny government that only robbed people a little bit and only violently dominated them a little bit. So I hardly ever argued with anybody who wanted even less than I did. But it would have been useful if somebody was actually pointing out, you're advocating evil crap. Don't do that. And going back to the example of the Nazis, at some point there's something actually wrong with talking as if their opinion is equally okay and equally valid. And now, well, I just think this and you just think that, and it's okay. Every opinion's equally valid. No, it freaking isn't. If your opinion is that it's okay to initiate violence against innocent people, your opinion sucks. Yes, you're in the majority. Most people are statists. Most people believe that. It still sucks. Still sucks. Still immoral. You should still be condemned for it. Because the Nazis in Nazi Germany, when they were surrounded almost entirely by other Nazis, or by people who didn't dare to speak out against them, should have been condemned and criticized and insulted and all sorts of disincentives. Well, they also should have been shot if they're all the way the ones enforcing it. But there needs to be societal disincentives for cheering for evil. And I'll use the other example, which is slavery. When the abolitionists were these crazy fringe kooks who thought slavery was totally bad and should be done away with, their guilt trip tactics were completely justified. And getting in people's faces and say you're condoning something totally evil and immoral and destructive and all that, they were completely justified. So, when people say, well, you should be nicer to statists, if you just mean tactically, like they're more likely to listen to you, okay, that may be true, and it's different for different people. Some people respond to some people will respond to one approach, some people will respond better to a different approach. But if you're talking about, if you're saying that it's actually bad to be condemning and insulting to statists, no, it freaking isn't. Saying words against somebody for advocating violence, the advocacy of violence is the bad thing. Calling them names isn't. Calling them names isn't even violence. It's condemning them for something that's evil. And whether you're talking about, slave owners or Nazis, in most other situations, in most other settings, people say, yeah, you don't have to be nice to a Nazi. You don't have to be nice to a slave owner. You can be totally judgmental, and you should. They should feel the wrath of all decent people in the world. And so should statists. Unfortunately, most of the people in the world are still statists, but they should feel the wrath for condoning violent aggression. And so I think, there's the tactical side of, well, you may want to approach it more gently. And the funny thing is, I'm arguing both sides because I totally do both sides. In Candles in the Dark, and by the way, I'll throw this in, that Amanda and I are going to be doing 2 Candles in the Dark events down in Acapulco next month, February 2019. One before Anarchapulco, and then one at the beginning of Anarchapulco, and then one after that at the beginning of Anarchaforco. And what we teach there is a completely gentle, nice, passive way to bring out of somebody their inner anarchist without being at all judgmental or at all argumentative. So we do that, and we focus on that, and we teach people how to do that. And the effects of that, the results you get, are just amazing compared to what you'll get from some random debate. And yet I also do the other side. When I'm in public, I'll do public debates, and I won't be all that gentle against people who advocate violent aggression, because it's not freaking okay. So I actually think both approaches are totally justified and are actually both useful in different settings. And if statists feel attacked and like they feel bad because people are being mean to them, stop being statists. Like, don't whine about the fact that people are hurting your feelings when you are literally advocating violence. There is one group of people in the world that don't advocate violent aggression. They're voluntaryists. And you know how I know they're the only kind? Because the word means the people who advocate all human interaction being voluntary. If you are not a voluntarist, you are by definition an involuntarist. You advocate violent aggression. If you're a statist, you advocate violent aggression. It might be a little tiny one compared to what that other person advocates. You still advocate violent aggression. That's not frickin' okay. You should be condemned and insulted for it. Now, people can decide whether to be nicer to you, but they don't have an obligation to do that. And again, lots and lots of people have been on the receiving end of statist violence, and they don't have an obligation to be nice to you when you advocate any flavor of that. So I firmly come down on both sides of this debate, that I advocate that people do both. Some people, or some of the time, use the gentle, passive, Socratic method to bring out of somebody what they already are, which is an anarchist deep down inside, or just bludgeon them over the friggin' head with condemnation for advocating the subjugation of mankind. Do either one, I don't really care. The results will be different with different people and in different settings. But aside from sort of the practical results of what does and doesn't work, statists, you don't have a right to not have your feelings hurt. Your hurlings. Blech. You don't have a right to not have your feelings hurt when you advocate the initiation of violence. Stop doing that. Instead of whining about the fact that people are being mean to you for advocating the initiation of violence, stop advocating the initiation of violence. That'll work.